Well, let us continue on in our series here on the supernatural. This is continuing talking where we left off last week. So if you haven't heard that one, go back and listen to it because it'll give you some context for this one. But we are going to talk about the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel uh, is a familiar story from Genesis. I'm going to read it for you first, and then we will talk about it. Genesis 11, 1 through 9 says, Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They used bricks instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, Come, let us build for ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other. So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. Now, at first glance, this does not seem to be like a spiritual rebellion at all. It seems to be pretty clearly a human one. So we ask the question, why was it such a big deal to build a tower? Well, to understand this, we have to understand that the Tower of Babel was meant to be a man-made Garden of Eden. It's described as a tower that reaches the heavens. So, Eden was a mountain garden where heaven and earth intersected. And most people don't realize that Eden was a mountain garden. But how do we know this? Because I make this claim, I want to back it up for you. It is referred to multiple times as the mountain of God. Ezekiel 28:13 and 14 reference it. You were in Eden, the garden of God. You were on the holy mountain of God. Secondly, 4 rivers flow out of Eden, almost as if they're flowing down from a mountain. Genesis 2:10, Now a river flowed out of Eden to water the garden, and from there divided and became 4 headwaters. Now, separately from that, Eden is kind of this theme that carries throughout Scripture. Often it's referred to also as Mount Zion. Eden comes to rest on different locations in Scripture. You also have kind of this idea that the trees are in the very center or at the peak of the mountain of Eden, which is interesting because that means Adam and Eve had to work to get up to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But there's a number of different locations where it is referred to as the mountain of God, which is also a reference to Zion as well. And so we can see that it is a mountaintop garden. Now I didn't realize this until a few years ago, but the more I've studied, the more I've just kind of paid attention and noticed that it is referred to in terms that would make that make sense. Now, by creating a man-made Eden, the goal was to reunite heaven and earth. So they build this tower with the intent of reaching the heavens. And Eden is where heaven and earth were united. Now, where was Babel? Because this is an important detail. Now, if you're not sure, it does sound like another city in the Bible. So there's your hint. It is a pretty well-known city within the Bible. It's also referred to as a nation as well. And it's actually kind of like one of the main villains in Scripture. And if you haven't guessed it yet, it is Babylon. The Hebrew for Babel and for Babylon are actually the same word. So, why then is it not called the Tower of Babylon? Well, it's called the Tower of Babel because the Bible does all sorts of wordplay. We often miss it in the Hebrew because we are English speakers. But the wordplay on the Hebrew balal. And balal means to confuse or to mix. Babel means gate of God. And again, this indicates their intent to reach the heavens. They wanted to make a gate to God, a gate to El Balal. and Babel, sorry. And they're seeking to reach the heavens. So this wordplay that happens is the gate of God becomes the gate of confusion. Now, do you remember Isaiah 14? The curse against the king of Babylon that compares him to Satan. We read it a few lessons back. We've referenced it a couple times here and there. And understanding the origin of Babylon as Babel helps this passage make a little more sense. Remember, it's a curse against the king of Babylon, and he's doing things that are like Satan. And there's this parallel that's going on. And it gives us some further insight even into the spiritual nature of this rebellion. Isaiah 14:4, 12 through 15 says, "You will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon, how the oppressor has come to an end, how his fury has ended. The Lord has broken the rod of the wicked, the scepter of the rulers, how you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to the realm of the dead, to the depths of the pit." Now, you'll notice that the comparison between Satan and the king of Babylon is that they both sought to ascend the mountain of God and become like God. Now, the story of the Tower of Babel explains how this is very similar to the story of the Tower of Babel. They seek to ascend a man-made mountain and become like God, a man-made Eden and become like God. And this parallels Satan. Now, this is not solid evidence. This won't hold up in court. This is kind of circumstantial. Now, the story of the Tower of Babel, it explains how the 70 nations are spread out over the earth after the flood. Now, I say the 70 nations. Why do I say 70 nations? I want to pause and look at that for a second here. The chapter before this story, Genesis 10, lists out 70 different nations that descended from Noah's three sons. Remember who Noah's three sons are? Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And these nations